Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1161 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Sometimes the best chapters are ones that you just sit down, you read, and you enjoy. This is one of those. It's becoming fairly regular now, especially within this flashback, but really it's been all of Elbaf and all of Egghead as well that we just begin these reviews by glazing Oda. Look man, I don't make the rules, I just play the game. So real talk, I feel as though God Valley could be a standalone entire One Piece arc. There is enough content here, especially including all the flashback preceding where this, if Oda really wanted to, this could be 50 to 100 chapters. Or even if you remove the time lapse that sort of came before the actual battle itself, you could compare this to Marineford easily. And what was Marineford? What, like 30 chapters? Nothing fundamentally stops the actual battle in God Valley from having the same duration. Aside from the obvious fact that this is a story about Straw Hat Luffy and his crew, and we're in the past right now. So obviously Oda has to balance this somewhat, and I think that reading this chapter, it comes off as pretty fast-paced. Like, we're not lingering too much. There are many things that are happening right now that could have been on-screened that are likely being off-screened. But despite it being really fast, Oda makes sure that this chapter sort of has a parable, like a short story to tell. Really, the whole point of having so many flashbacks in your story like One Piece does is how exactly does the flashback relate back to what is currently happening? So I'm sure that there are a lot of One Piece fans, a lot of One Piece fans that want to see more, potentially want to see more of like prime Whitebeard fight people, you know? But how strong Whitebeard is at this time is just not that important. So we get a feat, we get a flex, and that's pretty much it. While the chapter in its entirety tells a story of people pursuing treasure. Basically personifying or giving life to treasure itself and exploring the nuance of that. But I think it's by telling the story in this way that Oda was able to highlight characters that are actually still relevant in Elbaf, which is happening right now. Whitebeard, not relevant to what is happening right now in Elbaf. Summers, however, very relevant. Oda basically found a way to make us care so much more about the defeat of that character. I'm sure all of y'all felt it. We'll talk about it a little bit more, right? But like, I think that it's fair to say that suddenly now, Saint Summers is just basically a better character. So look, I say this often, but this is way harder to do than it seems, and I think that sometimes Oda deserves his flowers for all of the things, the decisions, the micro decisions that he makes. There is just so much noise to weed through here to make sure that the story stays on track. And Oda himself does not die before it finishes. But anyway, let's dive into the chapter itself, and I want to start off with the narrator text box at the very beginning, because I think like it's easy to sort of gloss over it, but it captures the essence of One Piece at like a very fundamental level. The narrator says, many figures converged on the island, bearing their individual goals and desires, turning God Valley into an inescapable battlefield of nightmares. So the idea of God Valley is that you have so many different people all drawn to this island because of their dreams and their desires. This literally applies to every single character here who is not a resident of God Valley. God Valley is effectively Treasure Island. Suddenly, everyone has discovered that the treasure is here, and they want to claim it. This very much is going to reflect the end of One Piece itself when the One Piece is discovered. Just one of the more brilliant things that Oda has done is that nobody in the world, aside from the Roger Pirates, I suppose, and maybe Emu, precisely know what the One Piece is, right? So they don't know exactly what it is, but they know that it's the treasure that they seek. So they kind of imagine it to be whatever it is that they want. Wealth, fame, or power. The One Piece is everything the world has to offer. Roger found it all. So God Valley is a bit different from when inevitably we find the One Piece, because the people that have arrived to God Valley essentially know what they're looking for, right? They know what's here that they specifically want. If it's Kaido and Big Mom, it's devil fruits. A lot of people are here for Shakky. So their overall knowledge of the treasure is greater. And even interestingly, in a case like Dragon, right? Dragon didn't come to God Valley because he was seeking the treasure. Circumstances brought him here, but once here, he also discovered a treasure that he was not anticipating. Dragon's dreams revolve around justice, and in God Valley, he discovered the truth. Or knowledge. You know, like people say, the truth hurts, but it's also something that a lot of us want. Or at the very least, we think that we want. So anyway, in the vast majority, potentially all stories that I have ever read, things like dreams are presented as like a wholly positive thing. If you wrote yourself a story where the theme is that you should not pursue your dreams, right? I feel like that would not be well received. But this does not mean that there is not nuance to the conversation that is potentially worth exploring, and in this chapter, One Piece explores. Let's just assume for a second, this isn't necessarily true, but let's assume for a second, right, that everyone's individual dreams are a good thing, and that pursuing them is a good thing, and that we are all intrinsically good people that want the best for ourselves and, as best as possible, everybody else. Yet if you put all of these individual positive things together, you get a very profound negative. So to reread what the narrator tells us, many figures converged on the island bearing their individual dreams and desires, which turned God Valley into an inescapable battlefield of nightmares. Like, a genuine argument can be made that it is our dreams and our desires, which are these, ideally at least, pure things, that is the root of everything wrong in the world. Nightmares are fueled by dreams. And honestly, it's pretty profound if you want to sit down and think about it, right? So, if you are out there and you have experienced nightmares, whether it's today or when you were a child, whenever, right? Think about the things that were your nightmares. What exactly made them nightmares? Obviously, you know the difference, like a dream is a good thing and a nightmare is a bad thing, but really think about it. I'm sure that there's been all sorts of scholarly work about nightmares or whatever that I'm certainly haven't read, nor do I plan to, right? But just from a layman's perspective, right? Nightmares are things that we fear. The two nightmares I had most as a child was, one, running around a track and suddenly I didn't have pants. Then I'm like trying to run, but I can't run properly, my legs aren't moving. And the other main nightmare was suddenly I'm in a room full of snakes. There are snakes everywhere, I'm trying to dodge them and they're biting me. These were my nightmares, I guess, because these were the things that I feared. Pain, embarrassment, lack of ability. But the point is that these nightmares really only exist because I have desires. And these desires by nature create fears. And these fears, when they become reality in the actual world or become reality in your mind in a nightmare, hurt. So how this all ties together is just interesting to me and is clearly a core theme of One Piece itself. Dreams are essentially what gives us a reason to live. Like, without them, I'm not sure that life is actually worth living. But it also makes us vulnerable to everything that we hate or fear. So yeah, even if you haven't articulated it or thought it out in precisely this way, we all pretty much know how to approach this, right? Basically things that cause us pain or fear are evil. Although it's different in every possible circumstance that you can construct, we must defeat the evil. And this is why we all fight each other. Because in the vast majority of cases, what stands between you and your dreams are other people, which is just a very cruel aspect of the nature of life. A ton of people here want Shakky, some are more or less justified, right? But at the end of the day, only one person can have her. Anyway, I don't want to linger here forever. At this point, I think that everyone gets it. But it's just another way in which the story of One Piece lingers in the gray area between good and evil, between black and white. It's a very nuanced take about dreams that most likely relates heavily to Buddhism. I think that when you start thinking about the world and everybody in it in this way, it just underscores how unfair everything is. Is it necessary for all of us to essentially be pirates and take from others so that we can enjoy life? Is happiness a treasure that we have to fight over? But I suppose the starting point in all of this is just recognizing that other people exist and they're really not that dissimilar to you. which is another one of those fundamental things that One Piece aggressively attacks. Because we see the celestial dragons here at the very start of this chapter, and the big difference between celestial dragons and everybody else is that they fundamentally do not believe that everybody else is like them. They're gods. They are entitled to the things that they want. So while this island is being attacked and the Marines are attempting to defend the Celestial Dragons, risking their lives to do so, they're telling the Celestial Dragons, hey, you need to leave. And the Marine who's saying this is saying it from the perspective of the longer that you stay here, the more of our lives will be sacrificed unnecessarily. Which of course the Celestial Dragon does not care about at all. As they say, hey, I want the prize, I'm not leaving without the prize. It all comes from their perspective that they are gods, they are better than, and that everyone else's lives don't matter. Honestly, I think the story is kind of delivering soft blows here, because I don't truly believe that there's a lot of people in the world right now who legitimately have a god complex. Like, even if this were to be true, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find these people saying like, oh look, everyone else in the world, their lives literally do not matter because I am a god. Pretty much 100% of people that are reading One Piece could look at the Celestial Dragons as like, look, that's evil, and I'm better than whatever they are. So the Celestial Dragons being the butt of the joke here is something that everybody can laugh at. But the way in which I think a lot more people subscribe to this philosophy is not by aggrandizing themselves, deifying themselves, it's by demonizing others. Which makes me more valuable than you, and why your life is worth less. So I just hope that you guys realize that these two things are essentially the same. Although you probably feel much, much better about it, which is probably why a lot of us do this. It's not typically us versus people who literally see themselves as gods. It's us versus people who we literally see as demons. But when a lot of people do this simultaneously, pointing fingers at each other, suddenly the nightmare is manifested and now everybody must live within it. But yeah, I would say the main reason that I'm bringing this up is that this isn't just a fight of pirates versus the gods of the world, the Celestial Dragons, right? A lot of this fighting is between the pirates and the Marines, who each believe themselves to represent justice. And caught in the middle of all of this is Dragon. I thought there was a really interesting line near the beginning of this chapter where Dragon has both babies and is attempting to run away, but he has a particular destination in mind. He says, hang in there just a bit longer. Where are the Navy ships? More pirates, no, it's not this way. Essentially, if you read between the lines and extrapolate, Dragon is communicating that at this moment, he still believes that the Marines represent justice. The Marine ships are his safe haven from this hell. So I'm not entirely sure in how much detail Oda is going to take this, but you can use this to sort of predict Dragon's next revelation. And I think that this is another sad aspect of our world and how it works, right? Dragon has discovered, for sure, this novel truth, right? The Celestial Dragons are evil, and what's happening here is obviously wrong. I think that he's under the impression that if he takes this truth to the Marines, or if the Marines discover this truth themselves, then there's no way that they can protect the Celestial Dragons any longer. You literally have to bend your mind into a pretzel to not see this very obvious thing. But pretzeling our mind is in fact a special talent that most of us possess. So I thought it was pretty poignant that as Dragon gets run down by a member of the Gods Knights, it's not the Marines who save him, it's the pirates who save him. Not that they're necessarily intending to do that, but that is what happened. The Marines were not the heroes. And the nail in the coffin to all of this, as Dragon is sort of hiding in the brush, he sees his own father attack not the Celestial Dragons, but instead attack the pirates. At approximately the same time that Dragon is overhearing the pirates talk about the reason why they're there, genuinely to save Shakky. I would bet a lot of money that the role reversal here, the pirates are playing the role of the Marines, the heroes, is very intentional. Dragon is meant to grapple with this new reality. The purpose is to make him question everything that he believed to be true. So look, to be clear, we don't actually need to see this play out to know it to be true, right? If Dragon took the baby, or babies, to the Navy ship, would they be safe there? No, he's a criminal, and the Celestial Dragons would order them to return the baby, which he has just saved. So I feel like this is an easily overlooked aspect of Dragon's journey within the flashback and within the chapter. He doesn't create the Revolutionary Army just because he learned the truth of the Celestial Dragons. he also learned the truth of the Marines. I mean, eventually I think he comes to the realization, for sure, that a new organization is needed. The Marines as a whole simply cannot see the world as it is. Whether it's because the truth hurts and they simply choose to delude themselves, or they rationalize it as the greater good, or they are too afraid. In this way, if you really want to think deeply about it, at least where Dragon eventually ends up is very different from King Harald in the flashback so far. King Harald is trying to join and perhaps change the world government. Basically, even though he knows that they're flawed, right, he wants to have hope, or he wants to believe that he can fight with them to make the world a better place. So look, this could work in one of two ways, both of which I think are pretty valid. Either Dragon is meant to foil King Harald, he's a different character who has made different decisions, or we haven't yet gotten to that point for King Harald. This flashback is not over yet, and Harald still has, most likely, many opportunities to lose faith in or lose hope that the world government can be his ally. Like, honestly, the big difference right now, I think, between Dragon and King Harald for sure is that Dragon now understands, like, who the celestial dragons are, and I'm not sure that Harald does yet, because that seems to be what Rox has tried to teach him. But so far, he has pointedly refused to listen. So at the end of the day, for Dragon, unlike King Harald currently, Dragon has learned or sees the value in some destruction. In this case, the destruction of the celestial dragons. Do you guys see how this is really the story being told right now, excluding all the specific details? Is there value in destruction and violence? Remember, this began as a King Harald flashback. Everything that is happening should relate back to him and also probably back to Loki. So you can apply this question to literally every person or faction present in God Valley. Most of them are seeking the destruction of someone or something. Is this right or is it wrong? You can judge every case for itself. But the crazy mind bender in all of this is I think that if, we as a community would come to a consensus about who's right and who's wrong, I think that our opinion would heavily reflect Chapter 1 of One Piece, right? Luffy and Shanks, their flashback, and Shanks' interaction with the bandit. For Shanks, it only became appropriate to fight when Luffy was threatened. Oda clearly hasn't forgotten about this because this is the same lesson that Shanks sort of demonstrates more recently in the story when attacked by Captain Kidd. Basically, it's appropriate to fight when your friends are in danger, when they need your help, which is basically what is going on here with a lot of the pirate world in Shakky. But the reason it's a mind bender is at what point in time, do you know that something or someone is threatening the ones that you love? When they have a knife to their throats, like at the end of this chapter, it is very obvious. But a lot of people don't just react to what is currently happening, they attempt to predict what will happen, the danger a group or a person will pose in the future. I totally get that we're getting a bit more hypothetical here, but this feels like it's part of the story as well. Will King Harald reflect Shanks and essentially refuse to fight no matter what happens until Elbaf and the Giants are directly threatened? Or will he instead do what I think a lot of us actually want him to do, although we may be, from the story One Piece's perspectives, wrong about this, but will he eventually sort of predict where all of this is going? For Harald and the Giants to achieve their dreams, the world government must be destroyed. So yeah, I apologize for so meticulously spelling this out, but this is something I'm currently grappling with and trying to wrap my mind around. I'm sure those who have been following my reviews are aware that what I really want is I want Harald to fight against the world government because what's happening is painful. It is incredibly obvious to us readers that the celestial dragons need to be destroyed. They're standing in the way of Harald's dreams and world peace. Essentially, we want Harald to make the same decision that Dragon eventually makes. And as I expressed in my last chapter review or the one before then, I'd be very disappointed in Harald if he doesn't. But look, I could just be absolutely wrong about this, like what Harald should do. I could be totally wrong. And as I think about it more, I just straight up think that I am wrong. Feels like the story of One Piece is about saving your friends, not destroying your enemies. Like, these two things are very intentionally not the same. And it makes me realize that a glaring omission in the flashback for King Harald so far is that he doesn't have any noteworthy friend he needs to protect or save. Harald basically rejected this opportunity when he rejected Rox as his friend, perhaps serving as just another reminder that what makes Luffy special is that he befriends everybody, essentially necessitating constant conflict. But yeah, I would also love to apply this conversation to Dragon as well. What's fascinating about him is that, at least in the current story, the impression that I have is that Dragon is trying to save as many people as he possibly can. But very much unlike Luffy, all of these people don't really seem to be his friends. I get the impression that Dragon perhaps wants to be cold and distant, almost like he's made saving people less personal and more of a numbers game. I want to save as many people as possible, but not necessarily save the people who matter most to him, if such a thing would only end up resulting in overall more sacrifices. If you guys can't tell, I love attempting to crack the nut that is Monkey D. Dragon, and part of the way that I attempt to do this is just by attempting to compare him with the hero of the story Luffy, who we presume is doing things quote-unquote the right way. But as far as I can tell, and I'm sure this is pretty shocking to a lot of people just on surface here, the highlighted difference, or one of the highlighted differences between Dragon and Luffy, is that Luffy is far more selfish than Dragon is. Luffy lets us know very clearly that he has no intention on being a hero or sharing his meat. Dragon, on the other hand, as it seems to me, is trying to be the hero, is trying to lead in a way that he thinks is right, impartial, unbiased. So when you start talking about Dragon in this way, we are in fact suggesting that Dragon possesses something akin to a god complex. He created the Revolutionary Army likely because he believes that he has the unique ability to save the world, without playing favorites, or probably more accurately, without prioritizing himself. Basically, we're saying that Dragon is the antithesis of the Celestial Dragons. They're literally here in this chapter only caring about themselves, and Dragon only cares about everybody else in a very objective or calculated way, managing the cost to benefit ratio of every decision he makes. And with this in mind, it's not a coincidence that within the chapter, Oda parallels Dragon with King Harald. As Dragon loses the babies to Saint Maffy, he thinks to himself, no wait, don't take those babies. They're the only way I can atone for being a part of this sick, murderous game. When you're talking about atonement in this flashback, you're normally talking about King Harald, who is trying to atone for the crimes of the giants, largely by attempting to emulate Nika. So I think what's subtly being communicated here is Dragon is soon to be on his pathway to pursuing Nika. Nika is a god. And I think that a lot of us gotta admit, right? If you're thinking about a Nika-like figure in the real world, you're probably thinking about a person more similar to how I have described Dragon here, the epitome of selflessness, rather than Luffy. And that's interesting. But whether this is literally Dragon knows about the legend of Nika and is pursuing that, or is just, circumstances have cultivated him in this particular way to want to save the world, we don't know yet. But I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't already thinking about this. There have been quite a few highlighted Nika candidates in this flashback, and I absolutely think that Dragon is one of them. To go along with Roger and Rox and King Harald and Shakky, etc. Despite getting what is essentially Dragon's origin story here, it doesn't mean that there isn't more flashback in the future for Dragon. A question that occurs to me often is, what exactly does Dragon's tattoo, which he doesn't have at this point in the story but will get eventually, what does that tattoo mean or represent? I very much doubt that the tattoo is random and has no meaning. So basically the way that the timeline works is that right now we're at 38 years before the present story. And the next update that we get for Dragon is approximately 25 years before the present story, when the freedom fighters were active. So personally, I think it's pretty interesting to think of what actually immediately happened for Dragon following God Valley. As we've already discussed, he's learned that the celestial dragons are evil. He's also in the process of learning that the Marines are not the gatekeepers of justice that he thought that they were either, but there may be some more story here about accepting this and coming to grips with it. I suppose all we really know at this point is that one of the babies was taken by a member of the God's Knights, but Dragon still had the opportunity to save the other, who is likely Shanks. Shanks, who we know, ends up in a treasure chest, and somehow the Roger pirates acquired it. So ultimately, Dragon does not end up giving the baby to the Marines, unless the story is convoluted or complex in a way that would be very difficult to predict. But then after all this, what exactly does Dragon do? I mean, he's still a 16-year-old person, right? Not a lot of options here. So to kind of get to the point here and share my idea or my theory, right? It's always been curious to me that around the first time that we met Dragon in Logtown, Dragon is introduced and there's something like a narrator text box quoting Gold D. Roger. Even if you don't remember this scene, everybody has heard this quote: "Inherited will, the destiny of the age, the dreams of its people. As long as people continue to pursue the meaning of freedom, these things will never cease to be." I believe this was literally the first time that Dragon got a face reveal, and it's happening as Gold Roger is being quoted. We also know that Dragon was there the day that Roger was executed, but Roger didn't say this particular quote when he was executed. So look guys, the way that I read this, and I may be wrong, right, but the way that I read this is that this quote from Gold D. Roger, which we actually have not seen him say in the story, right? This is a narrator text box. He hasn't actually said it to any characters that we are aware of. The idea is that Roger said this to Dragon. I'm just wondering out loud, before Dragon became a freedom fighter, did he become a pirate? If for no other reason, then given what's happening in God Valley now, there's not many other places for Dragon to go and be able to survive. Perhaps it's not a coincidence that following this Gold Roger quote, the reveal of Dragon says, "A pirate, eh?" Talking about Luffy. Not a bad idea. This could also be really interesting if Dragon ultimately gives the treasure chest to the Roger pirates, knowing that there is a baby inside there. The Roger pirates don't learn this later, but essentially, Dragon bet on the pirates above anybody else in God Valley, and that is also the story that is being told in this chapter. So I like the thought that Dragon pursues piracy as this sort of logical next step in his search for justice, which could be something that we could parallel with a character like Aokiji, because that's basically what's happened to Aokiji recently. Many things happened to Aokiji which made him question the Marines and the world government as justice, and the next step that he took was to become a pirate, likely hoping that the One Piece or the truth of the world would help illuminate his path forward. This conversation is also super interesting because of Aokiji's relationship with Nico Robin. It was almost like Aokiji was rooting for her. Basically, Dragon had a story that we could compare to Luffy, going from island to island, playing the hero, but rather than sort of doing this by chance, Dragon did it on purpose. And with this in mind, it gives Dragon even more opportunity to potentially meet and interact with Gold D. Roger. Some other things that are potentially of note that are just curious to me is it's never really been explained, but Ivankov in the present story literally has a Jolly Roger tattooed on their chest. So I guess I just like the thought that Dragon had his own Luffy-like adventure, but he approached it in like a polar opposite way. For Luffy, it's about the journey, it's about the adventure. For Dragon, it was always about the destination. We've argued that Dragon eventually developed some sort of stronger connection with Gold D. Roger, and we already know that he had a connection with the island of Ohara, the Scholars of Ohara and Vegapunk. These are two of the most prominent groups which discovered unknown truths about the world. So do you remember in Sabaody where Rayleigh was about to spill the beans about the One Piece to Luffy and the Straw Hats, and Luffy literally said, "Hey, nope, don't want to know." It would make sense to me if Dragon were the opposite, essentially in the same circumstance. Dragon's like, "Please tell me." Does Dragon already know everything? Which could include Nika and Joy Boy as well. So look guys, related to our discussion about Dragon, his pursuit of justice, trying to be impartial, unbiased, essentially be a godlike figure who can make all of the correct decisions with the best possible results. In contrast to all of that is the larger narrative of this chapter. This is quite literally a love story. I want to give a shout out to all of the people that compared the pursuit of Shakky, or Shakky as the treasure of God Valley, to Helen of Troy and the Trojan War, a war that was centered around a woman's love. We got a name drop for Rox's wife and Blackbeard's mother. Her name is Eris. Literally, this is the Greek goddess of chaos and disorder who instigated the Trojan War. The way that the story goes is, seeking revenge, Eris arrived uninvited to a wedding and threw a golden apple into the midst of the assembled gods and mortals. On the apple was inscribed the words, "For the fairest." This led to a dispute between the gods Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, who all claimed to be the fairest. Because they couldn't agree, Zeus assigned the choice to Paris, who was one of the central figures in the Trojan War. Each of the goddesses offered bribes to Paris so that he would choose them, and ultimately he chose Aphrodite, who then helped him abduct Helen of Sparta, the wife of the Greek king Menelaus. Thus she became Helen of Troy, and soon after this, the Trojan War. Look guys, I'm not going to claim to know everything, right? But this naming choice for Rox's wife is super interesting to me. So you decided to name her after the Greek god of chaos and disorder, the person who instigated the Trojan War, which is essentially the story of God Valley. We've already speculated this, so it's really easy for me to say this, but I'm just saying, everyone else should be thinking this as well. It's not necessarily guaranteed that Rox's wife, Blackbeard's mother, is a good person and is an innocent bystander in all of this. If I could be completely honest with you, I was about to give up on the theory that Blackbeard's mother could be Kurozumi Higurashi, who we met in Wano, the old witch lady, who could change her appearance. But this is kind of giving me hope again. Maybe that idea is still on the table. But specifics aside though, right, if you don't like this idea, it doesn't really matter. What we do have is genuine evidence that Rox's wife might be an interesting character. And as we've pointed out and speculated before, there's a running theme with Rox that I think will likely continue. Rox is constantly betrayed. Now we have ourselves a very tangible reason to believe that Rox might have been betrayed by his own wife. But anyway, I don't really want to trap your thoughts here. I want you to think as far and wide as you possibly can. Even if Oda used the Trojan War to help inspire him regarding God Valley, doesn't mean that the story can't be twisted and individualized in all sorts of different ways. So just to give you an example, purely creative on my part, but just as an example of what is possible. We already know that in the story of One Piece at this time, Shakky is considered the most beautiful woman in the world. And as you read this chapter, a lot of it between the lines, it becomes abundantly clear how important this title is. Being the most beautiful woman in the world has a price, which is that she has now become a treasure that basically everybody is trying to obtain. Acquiring Shakky's love is more valuable. Therefore, the person who does this is more wealthy having obtained it. So in a way, acquiring Shakky's love is a status symbol. It makes you a greater person if you have this. And this takes us back to the story of Rox. Initially, like everybody else, he coveted Shakky, right? But then at some point, gave up. Whether this is right or wrong is irrelevant. It's just simply a fact that this hurts Rox's reputation. Remember that a part of Gold D. Rogers' legacy, lasting legacy following his death, is that he obtained everything the world had to offer, right? That was the legend. Although legends can sometimes bend the truth, and we now know that this is not the case because Roger was unable to acquire Shakky's love, even though he wanted it. But through Roger, I think that you can understand the intangible value of being a person the world considers to have obtained everything. And simultaneously, the opposite of this with a guy like Rox, who was unable to obtain everything the world had to offer, despite having these same sorts of ambitions. So anyway, to get to the point here, right, I think that Rox and Eris, this could be another version of a love story. Eris understood Rox's great ambitions and also understood how much it hurt him that he couldn't get everything that he wanted. Basically, she was jealous that Shakky was the most beautiful woman in the world that everybody coveted, and that was a love that was intrinsically more valuable, which could easily relate back to the Eris from Greek mythology, the god who was not invited to the wedding and was not considered a candidate for the most beautiful. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that one way in which you could enrich this story is, in part, Eris was jealous of Shakky and helped facilitate the circumstances which led to her capture and enslavement. But the reason that she did this was for Rox, so he wouldn't have to suffer the indignity of being rejected by the world's most beautiful woman. Basically, Shakky needed to be erased for the sake of Rox's legacy. But obviously at this point in time, we don't really know anything about Eris aside from her name, so a lot of this is incredibly speculative. But when you start to flesh out this story in this way, that Eris cared a lot about Rox's legacy and wanted to help Rox fulfill his own dreams, you can begin to construct a compelling argument that Eris might have instigated God Valley for the singular purpose of allowing Rox to win this great battle. Basically, we're arguing that Eris might be a mastermind behind the curtain, which purely as an idea excites me a lot. There is just so much potential here. And I could also see this directly tying back to some of the core themes of Elbaf itself, like the present story, whenever we get back there. Essentially, what I think the story is trying to convey is that prophecies and faith are not necessarily a good thing because of the varying ways that people interpret them. God, I hope people don't get pissed off by the way that I worded that. Either way, Oda highlighted there are two main interpretations of Nika that are like polar opposite of each other, and nobody is entirely sure exactly which is the right one. And likely this has facilitated a lot of conflict within Elbaf and the world. We're also present for the story of Loki, who is likely attempting to fulfill the prophecies of Nika in the way that he has interpreted it, and likely he's doing it wrong because, like everybody else, he's fallible. So just relating this back to the real world and being very clear here, right? Every single religion that exists and is popular currently has been shattered into like countless different factions. But even on a more macro level, obviously not talking about all religions here, but on a more macro level, there's a lot of shared lore between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Over the last several thousand years, I think that most people understand how much conflict these varying interpretations have created. It's to the point that a lot of people right now genuinely believe that the world would be a better place without religion. So to continue our fictitious story about Eris, right, we've essentially argued that she wants Rox to achieve his dreams. What are his dreams? To become king of the world, essentially become a Nika-like figure. You could argue Eris to be a worshipper of Rox Dizabak. She believes in him as the savior of the world. She could literally believe in him enough to instigate God Valley, expecting him to both save her and destroy their enemies. If she has actually deified him, right, this would be a very reasonable expectation. But unfortunately for this fictitious version of Eris, we know how this all plays out. Rox loses, so in this case, Eris is responsible for killing her own god, which is something that potentially a lot of people also do. And so this sort of story would reinforce the theme that prophecies have some downsides. And also there are billions of people on the planet who all believe different sorts of truths, and statistically speaking, not everybody is correct. So how are we, us mere mortals, supposed to handle this? Anyway, I'll stop digging my own hole here, but just to backtrack a little bit and speak more generally, in this chapter, right, there's a very clear way that Oda depicted the rescue of Shakky. And I do believe that we should be thinking about the circumstances that will surround the rescue of Eris. But just given that Shakky is the world's most beautiful woman and literally everybody here is attempting to rescue her, right? They're actually fighting each other for this honor. Eris, on the other hand, is already pointedly different, right? Everybody wants to rescue or save Shakky, whereas what everyone seems to know about Eris and Blackbeard, members of the DAVY clan, the only people who really care about them want to kill them. So in this chapter, one man attempts to kill Shakky while everybody else wants to save her. I think with Eris, one man wants to save her while everybody else wants her dead. It therefore seems pretty probable to me that a lot of Eris's rescue is going to invert or foil what has just happened with Shakky. And also you might be able to apply this between Shanks and Shamrock and Blackbeard. Their stories also inverted or foiled. So let's break down the end of this chapter, and then flip it upside down. We find Shakky chained in a room, and she has already defeated all of the other people that were previously in the room. Basically, Oda wanted to depict Shakky as a woman who could, for the most part, take care of herself, save herself. It wouldn't shock me if Oda portrayed Eris as a woman who did not want to or could not save herself. Rox has to be the one to defeat all of the people that are actually guarding her. So in this way, Rox could be foiled with Saint Summers. Saint Summers arrives, everyone is already defeated, and he wants to kill Shakky. Rox arrives, has to defeat everybody, and then wants to save Eris. Rox would probably also represent Rayleigh here, as the person actually doing the saving. But I would be very curious to know if the reaction that we get between Rox and Eris is the same or very different to what we got at the end of this chapter with Rayleigh and Shakky. The glaring possibility that I would circle, ignoring the rest of this review, right, is it's very possible that Rox arrives too late. She is already mortally wounded and dies. Rayleigh saying, "Sorry it took so long, I've come to get you," and Shakky saying, "Oh Ray, you took too long." In this case would have drastically different meaning, even if the same thing was said. It would also work incredibly well with some of the themes of Rox that we have already discussed, constantly failing to obtain the things that he desires. But it could be even crazier than this if Oda wills it. Another part of all of this is finally the truth gets revealed. Rayleigh was in love with Shakky. So Rox might also have himself some sort of truth revealed to him. That would likely be very, very different. But anyway, guys, I apologize for the lateness of this review. With some of the subject matter that we're discussing, I have to find the appropriate balance of how I want to talk about it, if I want to talk about it, to just make videos that I actually want to make. What drives me to make One Piece content in the first place is to analyze it at the level that you've gotten if you've made it to this part of the video. Like honestly, even if I wasn't making content, this is what I would be doing on my own anyway. It's just what I love to do and sharing it with either myself or very close friends. I suppose you could say it is my dream to understand the story of One Piece. That is the adventure that I am on. And since I happen to be a content creator and a lot of you appear to enjoy this, you happen to be along for the ride with me. It's also somewhat scary because most One Piece theorists essentially try to speculate things in a vacuum, cool ideas and such, but my objective is to understand the story. So if ever I were perfect at this, then it would stop being theories. I would just literally be giving you spoilers. Not that this has happened or is likely to happen, but there absolutely could potentially come a time where you understand the story too well. But anyway, for the vast majority of the life of my channel, I've loved this dynamic and it's worked really well, and I feel like there's a great relationship between me and everybody who watches, like watching my channel is a fun time. If my voice doesn't annoy you or you find me too wordy or repetitive. Not to toot my own horn, right, but I do feel as though I have created a little sanctuary for some of the greatest One Piece fans who share my dream or love for One Piece, attempting to understand it at its deepest levels. But anyway, it should be obvious to a lot of people that the subtext of God Valley is incredibly political. Attempting to dissect it requires a lot, saying a lot of potentially controversial or disagreeable things. I absolutely love pursuing and thinking about these things on my own, but it becomes a different animal entirely when I start to share my thoughts and also explain what I need to so that you guys can see it from my perspective. But unlike the vast majority of successful creators, I do not enjoy making enemies, which this inevitably becomes because we hate things that we disagree with. And politics are by nature disagreeable, especially if you believe it to be some sort of existential crisis. A lot of you have come to realize that I do in fact worship the devil, or your ideas of the devil. It's quite topical. I really hope that you're able to appreciate how this sort of fits snugly in many of the things that we were discussing from this chapter. So jokes aside, straight up, a lot of this is not particularly fun for me. I don't really want my channel to have the lasting legacy of the channel that preaches at you, or even worse, represents some sort of evil in the world. Kind of like One Piece itself, I want my channel to be good vibes and fun, because I really want everyone to be my friend, sharing a laugh about whatever head-ass thing we happen to be talking about that is likely to be very, very wrong. But I also can't change who I am and what interests me. So it's just basically something that I have to figure out on my own. But yeah, this was also the best segue that I could find to talk about Oda's health, because there was supposed to be a chapter basically today, and we never ended up getting it because Oda had something happened with his health. Like, you guys do not realize how strongly I relate to this. I feel as though creating soulful art literally costs lifespan. The soul that you put into it, you don't always get back. So while this break provided me an opportunity to give you a video a little bit better than it came out the first time that I recorded it, obviously I'm here praying for Oda, hope he's okay. And on this very somber and introspective note, I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. As always, curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.